Hey everyone, welcome to Drawing Tutorials by Skip. We're going to be doing a series of tutorials designed to help you draw more realistically. We're going to start off with the basics here. This first exercise is going to show you how to do some shading and help with your tonal values. And it'll also help you when drawing portraits, learn how to do a nice smooth texture. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, for this first exercise we're going to be drawing a ball. So we're going to go ahead and do a circle. You can use anything you want for these, to draw your outline. Again, like I've said, you can use a template, you can use a projector, gridding, or you can freehand it. That's totally up to you. Now, I've used a 2B pencil lead, and I mark all of my, since I have a whole bunch of these same pencils, I go ahead and mark each of them with the lead that's in them. That way I know what I'm grabbing when I go to do it, because you certainly don't want to think you're grabbing a really hard lead and end up with a soft one, or vice versa. Now this is obviously really dark in spots, so what I like to do is come back with some blue tack and just lighten that up. And we're going to be going down to where it's darker at the bottom down there, so I'm not going to worry about that too much, but really want to get that pretty much all the way lightened up. And the reason I use the soft lead to do the outlines is, and you also don't want to press very hard, is so that you don't do any indenting in the paper, so that if you erase that off or come back and try to draw over it later, you'll have a line there that you don't want. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a harder lead, and what I'm going to go with is a 4H, and I don't know if you can see this, I guess probably not. I'm going to do a wedge, use the flat side of a wedge shape on the tip, and there's I'll insert a picture of that. And then I always use a piece of plexiglass. You can use a piece of paper. I use that to put my hand on so that I don't get any oils from my hand on the paper. That'll just destroy the paper. And then what I do is I like to, there's different ways people will draw. Some people will just draw in strokes like this, and they'll go and then they'll keep going up and down like that. And where that overlaps, you'll end up getting a much darker stripe in the paper, and that's really hard to get rid of. So what I like to do, some people also will use what's, I think they call circularism, and I believe that's where you just go in and start drawing a bunch of circles, and that would work. That should work just fine. I use something I like to call a controlled random stroke, and basically what that is you're just going in completely random directions. You'll go this way and then this way and then this way and this and all over. Much smaller than that, obviously, but in doing this, it's much easier to come back later and smooth it out to where you get a really smooth finish. Also, when you do this, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and you can end up with a lot of different textures that are very useful. As a matter of fact, this stroke is the one I use for almost everything I do, except for obviously like hair or something. And what I like to do also is, when I'm drawing something like a portrait, doing skin, especially if I'm trying to get a nice smooth texture, is I will go and do the whole, everything that I'm doing in the same basic tone. I will do the whole thing in this base layer, and what this does is it gets some graphite down in the tooth of the paper and kind of smooths it all out, kind of like spackling over a wall to get a nice smooth finish on it. Well, that's not perfect, obviously, but when you come back and put on a subsequent layers of graphite, either with the same lead or a softer lead to get a darker tone, it goes on much more evenly. So I am going to go ahead and finish this up, and then we'll come back and start on the next layer. Alright, so we've got the whole thing in a base layer, and what we're going to do now, we're going to start shading from the bottom going up. I'm using an HB for this, and this point where this is going to be the highlight, And so we're going to be sitting on whatever, a table or something down here. So this bottom part down here is going to be the darkest part of the ball. And because of what I'm going to do here is just kind of throw a line down. Because the light's going to be reflecting off the table or whatever it's sitting on, we'll leave just a little lighter spot up here. So right in here will be our darkest part. As you can see, I'm still using that same random stroke. And what we'll do is we'll start down here and just work our way up lighter and lighter until we get up to the highlight, where we'll just leave that white. And you want to work in nice small little movements. You don't want any particular stroke to stand out over the other one. That's how we're going to get a nice smooth finish. And this will just continue on up until we get all the way up to the, again, to the highlight. And I'm going to go ahead and jump on ahead again, since watching somebody draw is just about as exciting as watching paint dry on the wall. Alright, well now we're going to ground this thing out, as it were. We're going to go ahead and add a shadow underneath it. What this will help do is really define this bottom edge down here where that reflective light comes up. Again, using that random stroke. One of the hardest things to do is to get really dark areas even, and this will really help you with that. I'm not going to take this down too dark, just give you an idea of what we're doing here. So we'll kind of come down to about here. Round that off. And the same thing with everything else. We kind of get the darkest part of the shadow will be right underneath the ball, and then it'll kind of lighten up from there. And go ahead and quickly finish this off. Alright, that gives you the idea. And then one other thing I wanted to show you. Before we start blending, you wanted to get, especially like say this is a cheek or something here, and this is the edge where you're going to have white paper outside of that. If you're going to have something darker, you don't need to worry about this. But what you can do is take that wedge tip, and instead of going on the flat part, kind of tip your pencil up a little bit and get toward your drawing on the point, and draw very softly, and use a very, very hard pencil. I'm using the 6H here because it will come out much darker when you're on that fine, sharp tip. But go ahead and get a nice defined edge, and then you can kind of go back on the flat part and kind of even that out. One of the really important things on especially on a portrait or something, is to have that really, really sharp defined edge. That'll help it make it look very realistic. So anyway, we would go ahead and do that all the way around. But right now what we're going to do So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start blending this. Let's go ahead here with a tortillon. And we've got a nice fat one here. It's already been used. So one thing you'll notice is when you start with a really dark area is the tortillon will tend to pick up a fair amount of graphite, so it'll kind of lighten up what you've done. Go in nice circular motions so that you, same thing, so that you don't get the overlapping long strokes that'll show up later. You see an area that's a little off, you go ahead and work it a little harder. And these areas here are really light. We're going to darken those up a little bit here in just a minute. So now I'm going to stop here in just a second, because if I keep going, I'm going to keep dragging that darker graphite on up into the lighter areas. You can sand, take these and run it along sandpaper if they get used, and you can get off some of that graphite so you can keep using them. But what I'm going to do now is just come up here to the light area and right around that highlight, blend that in so we don't have an edge there. And then just keep taking that on out. Normally I would be flipping this paper around as I'm doing this, so I'm always kind of going in the same direction, but we'll keep it like this so that we can see it easier on the video. Obviously be careful when you get toward an edge so that you don't blow right on out and go where you didn't want to go. And then you just take it down and then you blend out this transition area here. Obviously those are going to be the areas that are the hardest to get even. So you're just going to keep blending it. And then down here I'm going to just take and blend into this little reflective light area. We don't really want that light, we just want it to be slightly lighter than the rest of it there. And that is the basics of that. Now you can see it's still not really even, and that's why I don't like to use tortillons all that much. They just don't really get, I mean, you'd have to really work them to get a nice smooth finish. So that's the way it looks with a tortillon. And now let's go ahead and take the chamois. Now this will even lift off more graphite in the dark area. So you have to be careful when you're going over something that you really want dark, because this will lift off a lot of graphite, so you'll lose a lot of what you've done. Okay, and just kind of, the problem with the chamois is that it's really hard to get right along the edges. Obviously you've got a very rounded tip with your finger in there. Sometimes what I'll do is take a tortillon and stick inside there so I at least get a sharper tip, and you kind of get right up along the edge. Okay. And that is the basics of how to get a nice smooth texture. Again, this works really good on skin tones. As we go along and get much further along, we'll go over some different textures for skin. Obviously skin in reality is not very smooth, so depending on the portrait you're doing, you may want to get a much rougher skin texture, and that's where the stroke I was just showing you comes in handy. So that's the first lesson. Kind of shows you how going from lighter to darker gives you some shape to that object. Instead of looking like a flat piece of paper, it actually looks like a round ball. What I would do, and I'll go ahead and finish some of this up, and then I'll post the picture on the blog, but I would darken this up a little bit more after that chamois and even it out a little bit more, and also even this out. But other than that, that's basically it. So we'll go from there. We'll work on the next lesson. I think I'm going to start with a portrait so that you can see the different techniques for drawing eyes and mouth and teeth and lips, things like that. So check back if you have any questions again, or any things that you would like me to show you how to draw. If you're having trouble with something in particular, like again lips or eyes or anything like that, post a comment and we'll work up a tutorial for you. All right, we'll see you next time.